Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure we will end up wiser after his talk finished. Please accord a warm welcome to Senator Mushahid Hussain.
Thank you, Esup. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. In the name of the Almighty, the Lord of all mankind. Assalamu alaikum and good evening to all the ladies and gentlemen who have taken time out from their engagements to be here this evening at this gathering of this very prestigious English-speaking Union of Pakistan. The English language is a very important connection of Pakistan with the international community, and we were very fortunate that from day one, the English language has played a big role in not just promoting education, not just promoting communication of Pakistan with the outside world, but for us also, it became the language of liberation, because the father of the nation, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and the founding fathers of Pakistan, they had used the medium of English language to negotiate, to struggle, and to seek freedom from Pakistan from British colonialism. So English language was used as a weapon of liberation in the days of the freedom movement, and I think that's very important, that English language relevance is there. I remember I went to China as a teenager from college days in the 70s, and I went to a school where they were teaching English language, and I was surprised. And then I saw a saying of Premier Zhou Enlai, and he said, "We learn English for the revolution." And this is the period of Mao's China. So the language, English language, is a very important contributor to, in fact, science and technology also. Thank you very much, and I'll just be very brief in giving the broad contours of what I see as Pakistan's role and what are the new realities. I think before we go into that, I'd like to just see what was the vision of the founding fathers. And I think that's very important. And I'd like to mention in this regard the Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the father of the nation, and also Quaid-e-Millat Liaquat Ali Khan. In his first interview given to a Western journalist, the Quaid-e-Azam, and this interview appeared in the famous American Life magazine, January 1948, and you can Google it also. There's a lady, she interviewed him in actually October 1947, and the interview was published as a cover story of the Quaid. And October 1947, you can envisage what kind of Pakistan was. We just achieved freedom. We were at war with India. Our money was held up by the Indians. There was an influx of population, an exodus of population. There was hardly a bureaucracy or an armed force in Pakistan. So it was a difficult moment for the country. Our country was just being established. And she asked the Quaid-e-Azam, what is the future of Pakistan? What role will Pakistan play? And you can see the vision, the confidence, the foresight of the Quaid-e-Azam. He said, and I quote, "Pakistan is at the center of gravity in global politics, a region where the future geopolitics of the world will revolve." And you can see, at least the events of the last 50 years also, we have been in the eye of the storm, as it were. We have been pivotal in the whole situation. Quaid-e-Millat Liaquat Ali Khan went to the United States on a 23-day tour with Begum Rana Liaquat Ali Khan in May and June 1950. And he did a number of series of speeches, articles. It was a very successful tour. He addressed the joint session of Congress also. And when he returned, there was a compendium of his speeches and articles with a preface by the great American journalist Walter Lippmann at that time. It was published. It was called Pakistan, the Heart of Asia. This was in 1950. So you can see, and 2 years ago, in Islamabad, we hosted the Heart of Asia conference. Yes. So this was the vision of the founding fathers, in the 40s and the 50s about Pakistan's role in this very important region. And by the grace of the Almighty, we have been playing that role, sometimes at a great price for the country, but we have a broader vision also, and that has been important in Pakistan's role, not just in the region, but in the international community. Ladies and gentlemen, this is 2019. 40 years ago, in 1979, there were 4 major developments, separate developments, geopolitical, which impinged on Pakistan's role in the region, and which today also are a factor in deciding our foreign policy choices, our foreign relations, and our outlook of the world. Because where we are located today, this is truly the center of gravity of global politics. In February 1979, the revolution in Iran, which overthrew the Shah of Iran. The reverberations, the impact, implications are being felt even today. Next door, neighbor, the Soviet invasion and occupation of Afghanistan. The implications, the fallout is being felt even today. China, under Deng Xiaoping, decided to reform and open up, have a free market economy under the Communist Party of China. China changed course 40 years ago. And you can see the impact of China, our best friend, our neighbor. And China is today the world's 2nd largest economy. Because when I went to China, I thought China was a very poor and backward country. There were no motor cars, there was no communication with the outside world, there was poverty. Most of the people were wearing blue tunics, the unisex dress, bicycles, and even Beijing was cut off of the world. So you can see that. And the 4th one was the US decision in July 1979 to establish a permanent presence in the Gulf and our region. The Rapid Deployment Force was announced by Jimmy Carter, which was the forerunner of the US Central Command, the CENTCOM, which now starts from Pakistan till Mauritania, covering Southwest Asia and North Africa. So these 4 decisions, or developments rather, you can see the impact even today. When we talk of today's world, we look at some new realities. First at the global level, then at the regional level. At the global level, we see an inexorable shift in the global balance of political and economic power from the West to the East. 21st century is the Asian century, and whether it's economy, culture, different areas, you can see the clout, the influence of the Western countries, especially Europe, and to some extent the United States, diminishing today as compared to the past. And that's a very important change and shift. And with this shift, we see another shift, which is, I think, linked to that, China's transition from being a regional power to a global power. Till recently, China was a regional power. Today, it is perhaps the one country that is emerging to compete with the United States in different areas. And Russia is now relegated to the background as compared to China. So that is a very important transformation in global politics. And you can see that assertion at different levels. And the third important global development is that we also have the makings of a new Cold War, where China and Russia are seen as threats, Putin in Europe, China in Asia, and in fact, if you see the US National Security Strategy for 2018, it says clearly that, and I quote, China and Russia today are a greater threat than Al-Qaeda and ISIS, quote unquote. So this is broad contours of the world we are seeing. And in that context, we have seen the war on terror after 9/11. And according to the study by the American Brown University, which is in Rhode Island, IVD, it was conducted in November 2018. According to that study, the US has spent $5.9 trillion in the war on terror after 9/11. There's wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, even Pakistan, the whole range, all told. And this is the study they have completed. And in Afghanistan, it's almost $1 trillion, and with 25,000 casualties, including 4,500 fatalities. And you can see how the entire Muslim world or the Middle Eastern region and our region is still in a state of flux. Coming closer to home, we see the region where Pakistan is located, where 1/5 of humanity resides, the South Asian subcontinent. Three new realities which are directly going to impinge on Pakistan and our role and foreign policies and also domestic for the next few years. The first, of course, is what happened on 5th of August. Prime Minister Modi's annexation of Kashmir. And not just it was annexed, but they had also earlier annexed Goa and Hyderabad and Junagadh in the days of Nehru. But they also partitioned Kashmir and made those two areas, Ladakh bordering China and Jammu and Kashmir with disputed territory with Pakistan's line of control as union territories. And the partition is as if to split the territory on religious lines, because Ladakh has a large Buddhist component as well, and Jammu and Kashmir has a large Muslim component as well. So that has strong implications for Pakistan. It is probably the single most important development in the region since 1971, because they've tried to alter the geography of the region, that status quo. So that is one important thing. Second, and I mentioned 40 years ago the Afghan situation. After 40 years, there's a glimmer of hope in the Afghan peace process. Pakistan, China, United States, and even Russia, together with the government of Afghanistan, are working together to achieve some semblance of a peace agreement. And the spokesman of the Afghan Taliban said 90% of the agreement has been reached. Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad had mentioned also that by and large there's an agreement. Mr. Trump, when he had a meeting near his New Jersey golf course with his national security team last weekend, he also mentioned he was hopeful. So there is a glimmer of hope that perhaps the war in Afghanistan will end. And Pakistan has faced the consequences of war. Apart from the people of Afghanistan, Pakistan has suffered the most from this conflict. And I would say that there's been a healthy change in Pakistan's policy. And here I would say that even our system or our establishment or our governments, they have now had a review of past mistakes, where Pakistan had a larger than life role, a larger ambition, and now it's very clear that there should be an independent, sovereign Afghanistan without foreign interference, and peace, security, and stability in Afghanistan is inextricably intertwined with peace, security, and stability in Pakistan. And that reminds me of what the great visionary, the great philosopher, Allama Iqbal had mentioned in 1932, that if there is conflict, he mentioned fasad in Afghanistan, there will be conflict in Asia. And if there is peace in Afghanistan, there will be peace in Asia. How correct he was. You can see that situation. The third major reality, new reality is China's role. The Belt and Road Initiative launched by President Xi Jinping in 2013, of which the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is the centerpiece, the flagship project. In fact, I'm going tomorrow to Sakkar to inaugurate this Sakkar-Multan motorway project, which is one of the mega projects which will link up different parts of Pakistan together, and shorten the route from Sindh to Punjab by road. And probably the Belt and Road Initiative, it's called BRI also, is the single most important developmental and diplomatic initiative of the 21st century. Because the scale, the size, the speed is amazing. It brings in about almost 100 countries of Asia, Africa, Middle East, and Europe through connectivity, through infrastructure. The CPEC in Pakistan was launched also about 5 years ago, and President Xi Jinping visited Pakistan. There are about 22 early harvest projects which are supposed to be completed in the next 1 year, out of which 9 have been completed, 13 are en route. 70,000 Pakistanis have got jobs in these projects. The load shedding issue has been by and large contained, if not fully resolved. There's also a lot of connectivity, and 28,000 Pakistani students are now studying in China and different areas. And also we've had a new agreement on trade with China, and we are also entering the second phase of CPEC, which is going to be focusing on socio-economic development. And I can go into details later on. So it is in that context, Pakistan's role is very clear that on the one side, we have got, I think, what I would call strategic space for the next 2 years. For two reasons. One is the United States of America, the other is China. When the Prime Minister went to the US last month, and then there were statements from President Trump also. President Trump's desire for peace within a certain time frame is also driven by electoral politics of the United States. Because the US is having its presidential elections. President Trump badly needs a big diplomatic triumph. He tried it in Korea, it didn't succeed. He tried it in Middle East, it didn't succeed. And he feels that perhaps Afghanistan is important, and he has realized that perhaps the road to the White House in 2020 goes through Islamabad and Kabul. Because he apparently has linked his political fortunes with an Afghan peace process. Pakistan is trying to deliver as best as it can. And if you remember, there were talks in Beijing also on 11th and 12th of July where we took part. And so we are playing our role in that. And that serves the interests of Pakistan. Because the instability in the region, it affects other countries also. So that has given us strategic space. So the pressure which was there from the US on Pakistan in the past is no longer there. And you can see that when Trump announced his South Asian strategy on 20th of August 2017, there he almost treated Pakistan as part of the problem. Now he sees Pakistan as part of the solution. And you can see their attitudes, their policies. They received our army chief also with 21 gun salute in the Pentagon. Then they also, the tweets he mentions 2 good friends, the Prime Ministers of India and Pakistan. He's talking of Kashmir also, he's talking of mediation also. And the tone and tenor of US policy, if you see the statements, is different today than it was during Pulwama in February. So that is one. The second area which has given us strategic space is CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Forum. Because when China came to invest in Pakistan in 2013 and 14 and then 15, at that time, the image of Pakistan was very different. And no other country, whether Western or even any Muslim country, was willing to invest in Pakistan. It was seen as a country which was unstable, which is volatile, which is terror infested, and they gave a vote of confidence in the future of Pakistan. And today you can see that even Saudi Arabia and UAE are talking of investing in Gwadar port, which is the centerpiece of CPEC. And also because of CPEC, we are seeing the evolution of what I would call a greater South Asia. South Asia was not just a political concept of the South Asian subcontinent of Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, and the Maldives, but a greater South Asia which is driven by economy, energy, ports and pipelines, roads and railways, which includes Iran, which includes Afghanistan, which includes Myanmar, which includes the Central Asian republics of Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, and also perhaps some of the Gulf countries if they want to join in. So that kind of South Asia where there's greater economic cooperation. And now already in CPEC, the second phase, a special working group has been established between China and Pakistan, which will focus on international cooperation and expanding CPEC beyond Pakistan and China to perhaps start with Afghanistan and other countries. And already on 6th of September, I think, the foreign ministers of China and Afghanistan will be in Islamabad for a trilateral between China, Afghanistan and Pakistan. So a lot is happening in the region. And this situation is leading to greater economic cooperation in the region, which is the need of the hour. However, what has happened after August 5th has changed some of the dynamics. And there, I think, a new situation has arisen where the Pakistani government, the Pakistani parliament, the armed forces, all the political parties have risen to the occasion in a unified national response. You mentioned the Special Kashmir Committee. We had a session on 17th of August, 3 hours long. We discussed a lot of details and what is the way forward. This is the long haul. Because on the one hand, there is the popular, spontaneous, widespread and indigenous uprising of the Kashmiri people, in which they are braving Indian bullets and Indian pellets, and an occupation army which is probably the largest soldier to civilian ratio in modern guerrilla warfare or modern insurgency or modern resistance movements. Then also the disturbing signs are emanating from India, from Modi's India, where the kind of language, the kind of mindset reflects an ideological approach in foreign policy, which is quite dangerous. And that has a very strong anti-Muslim and anti-Pakistan component. And here I would like to refer to the article, which is an outstanding article, and I would say it's a must-read article by the great Indian writer Arundhati Roy. She wrote on 15th of August in the New York Times. In fact, the best coverage has been given by the New York Times and the Washington Post on these issues. And I would urge you to see those articles. But the best one which I saw so far was Arundhati Roy, because in her analysis occurred in the New York Times on 15th of August, which is India's Independence Day, she mentioned that the way India has annexed, occupied Kashmir, and I quote, that there was a whiff of colonialism in the air. So it was that kind of as a return to the Raj, to the native Raj, the way they tried to capture that. Then she also mentioned about the role of the ideological mainstay of the Modi regime, RSS, who derive their inspiration from 20th century classical fascism. Writings by the founders, Savarkar and others, have a very strong anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim content, because they were inspired by Hitler of that period in the 1920s and 30s. And she says, Arundhati Roy, that the RSS is now the state, quote unquote, in that article. Then she also mentions, and I quote from an article in the New York Times, Arundhati Roy, who's a very courageous lady, that and I quote, the architecture of Indian fascism is now being put in place. That's what she said. That how history books are being changed, how lynchings, mob violence, inciting that anybody is accused of eating beef, lynch that person, and attitudes which are there. And even statement by Mr. Modi when he had 1,000 Muslims were massacred in Gujarat in 2002, as a result of which his visas for the US and UK were cancelled, including a member of parliament of Gujarat, a Muslim, Ahsan Jafri, was burnt alive in front of his house without police coming to the rescue. He was asked, do you have any remorse or regret over this huge massacre, which is almost tantamount to a genocide of sorts or ethnic cleansing? He said, yes. If you're driving in a car and if you overrun, the motor car overruns a puppy and the puppy is killed, then we feel sorry for the puppy. So that was his attitude at the killing of 1,000, the massacre, willful massacre of 1,000 Muslims. And that, and then she also mentions Arundhati Roy. I'm quoting Arundhati Roy, the Indian journalist, writing in an American newspaper. So it's not just from Pakistan side or anybody. And she mentions a pattern. She says, since 1947, there has not been a single year when Indian army was not used against its own people within India. And she, not just Kashmir, but talks of Indian Punjab and so forth, and also other areas, Manipur and Nagaland and Mizoram and Tripura and so on. So what we are seeing now as a consequence of these policies is that relations between India and Pakistan are likely to deteriorate. And I think India is also very upset that how Kashmir has been internationalized as an unintended consequence of their own follies. Because what the action they took, and you can see the statement of the UN Secretary General. He mentioned on 8th of August, UN Security Council resolutions, UN Charter, and bilateral agreements. So and then even the UN Security Council meeting which took place, they came out with a statement issued by the United Nations Press Office, which talked of the resolutions. So for Pakistan, the challenge is that how to highlight the plight of our Kashmiri brethren who are bravely resisting the repression, and also how to alleviate their sufferings in human rights. So this would involve a sustained strategy over a longer period. And I mentioned in the meeting that the most important thing we must have is that kind of stamina, that intellectual stamina, the mental stamina, even the physical stamina, to see through these policies. And I said it has to be done the way we did with the nuclear program. When we started the nuclear program, there were pressures in 1974. And they continued for 24 years under different governments. But people were on track, they were focused,
And they said, no, this has to be achieved with single-minded determination. So this has to be involving a strategy for Kashmir, the Kashmiri people. And I was sometime back in India, and they asked me, so at the Observer Research Foundation, they said, why are you interested in Kashmir? What is your interest in Kashmir? I said, we are not interested in Kashmir, we are interested in Kashmiris, the people of Kashmir, because they are suffering. And I said, we didn't start the uprising in '89, we can't stop it, because we were talking about Afghanistan. After Simla, we were focused on other areas. It's the Kashmiri people who rose up against the Indian occupation. So we are morally and legally bound to support them. Then there has to be a clear strategy for India. And India is a very diverse country. And we should be very clear that there are a lot of dynamic and positive elements of Indian society. People like Arundhati Roy, there's Mamata Banerjee. The women are tougher than men when it comes to issues and take a braver stand. She's Chief Minister of Bengal, and even yesterday she had a very strong tweet expressing solidarity. And then there are the Communist Party, the Congress Party, the Dalit parties. And next year, the Khalistan movement is planning a referendum symbolically. So a lot is happening there. So we have to have an outreach to Indian Parliament, to Indian civil society, to the Indian intelligentsia. Because Modi's India is not the entire India that represents them. And we have to stop it. And then there's the international community. So we have an opening, an opportunity for that. And Pakistan's voice will be heard because of what is happening on the ground and the way the situation has developed. So in that context, I feel that an important element that needs to be also catered to is that any foreign policy is also an extension of a domestic base. So, and I mentioned in my paper also when I at the committee that the country also needs a healing touch. There are areas which are fault lines, vulnerable points, especially in Balochistan and FATA, which our system, our governments have to make sure the sufferings of those people are alleviated, and so we can take that forward. When we look at the region, I do not see an India-Pakistan war. There will be a threat of war, there will be bullying, but I would be, since the nuclear tests between India and Pakistan in 1998, an informal balance of terror is there. And they realize that if there's a full-fledged conflict, it can spin out of control. And also in Pulwama, Pakistan gave a very swift and solid response. They violated our territorial integrity in Balakot, and we hit back the next day by shooting down 2 of their planes, including capturing one of their pilots. And then we returned the pilot as a goodwill gesture. So I think that side also realizes that it will be. But what I do anticipate is that some kind of proxy wars or low intensity conflict or covert operations could be there, which would be very, very destabilizing. So it is very vital, since we have this distinguished audience of diplomats from different countries. We have former diplomats also, people who have served with distinction in this country. Kadasab, I saw you in action in London. Atiya, I have known her for a long time since she was a journalist also, and others also were here. So it is important that we engage the international community. And that is why the international community in the last 1 year has been very positive, at least certain parts of that. Say on human rights, we have had the UN Human Rights Council's 2 reports on Kashmir. We have had the report of the All Parties Parliamentary Group on Kashmir from the British Parliament, the House of Commons. We have had reports of Amnesty International. We have had other reports also from different Human Rights Watch also. And now then even the last time Kashmir was mentioned in the UN resolution was in 6th of June 1998, resolution 1172, where they mentioned that after the nuclear test, that the core issue of tensions is Kashmir and that should be resolved. So after 20 years, we have seen again a revival of that. So it is now up to us to seize that moment, see this challenge as an opportunity to move forward. And the positive thing is that some of the mistakes of the past, we have learned from that. One of the biggest mistakes was Afghan policy. I, as a journalist, was a critic of that Afghan policy. I went to Afghanistan during the Soviet occupation, interviewed Najibullah also, Karmal also, and that talk of strategic depth of a larger-than-life was a wrong policy. And we alienated our neighbors, and I'm glad that relations with Iran and Afghanistan have also improved, and we have a much better collaboration and relationship in that regard. So, and we hope that with Bangladesh also, I have had the privilege and distinction of being a student in Dhaka. They are former class fellows of mine who studied in Adani Cantonment Public School. And we used to learn Bengali and write Bengali also, and play football with Sheikh Kamal. He was studying in Shaheen School. He was son of Sheikh Mujib. So, and I always say, "Ai shonar Bangla, ami tomar bhalobashi." That, oh, golden Bengal, we love you. So I think that's very important because we do not have any fundamental conflict of interest with Bangladesh. And whenever there are national days there, I'm there meeting with Tariq Hassan Saab and others. So I think it's important to have an outreach. Important to learn from our mistakes and move forward. So, as the Qaeda-Azam has mentioned that Pakistan is the pivot of the world in those days, I think our role has been pivotal. In the last 50 years, if you see, 71, we did the opening to China for the United States. The last big battle of the 20th century, which ended the Cold War, the so-called Afghan Jihad, we played a role, and after 9/11 also. So inshallah we'll play a role for the better for our people also, and that role will be the building block of a better tomorrow for not just Pakistan but for the region that we live in. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.